While my father broke my bones, my mother only made one sound in the dark room, the crunch of popcorn between her teeth. To them, I wasn't a daughter. I was the evening's entertainment. For 15 years, my body was the stage where they performed their private horror show. Good morning, my dear friends. How are you all doing today? I hope you're well, healthy, and at peace. I'm Linda Andrews Thompson, 72 years old, born in a small town called Milfield in rural Ohio. But I've been living here in Portland, Oregon for over 40 years now. Time flies so fast, doesn't it? It seems like just yesterday I arrived in this big city, intimidated by everything, and now I feel like I've been a part of it my whole life. What a beautiful day it is today, with sunshine streaming through my living room window. I'm sitting here in my green armchair, the one my late husband Robert gave me for our silver anniversary. From my little corner, I can see my collection of ceramic guinea fowl figurines decorating the entire wall. Have you ever seen one of these? They're small handmade sculptures, all painted with white spots and vibrant colours, just like real guinea fowl. Every morning, I wake up early before the sun rises. I make my coffee strong. I don't care for those fancy modern machines. Coffee brewed in a traditional percolator is the only kind with real flavour. Then I go to my little workshop I've set up in the spare room. That's where I create my ceramic guinea fowl. I have clay, paints, fine brushes, and a special kiln. My neighbours joke that I'm the neighbourhood's Guinea Fowl Grandma. I started making these miniatures when I was still living with my daughter, Cecilia. It was after I became a widow about 15 years ago now. I was sad, didn't want to get out of bed, and she signed me up for a ceramics class at the community centre. "Mum," she said, "fill your mind with art and sadness won't find room." And you know what? It worked. From that first crooked guinea fowl I made, today I have a collection of more than 200, all different. People even come from other cities to buy them. I even have a website. Imagine that. A woman my age selling art online. And look, it hasn't always been easy getting to where I am today. Life has its ups and downs, as they say. There were times when I thought I wouldn't make it, that I wouldn't have the strength to go on. But today, at 72, I can say that I survived it all. We're stronger than we think, my dears. We can endure what seems impossible to bear. From my apartment on the 3rd floor, I have a small balcony where I leave my freshly painted guinea fowl to dry. The children in the building love to come up and watch me work. I teach them how to model clay, and we make colourful little animals together. Seeing their eyes light up when the piece is finished is one of the greatest joys of my life. Each guinea fowl I make is unique, has its own personality just like each one of us. And you, my dear friends watching me now, tell me in the comments, which town or city are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? Early morning with your coffee, after lunch, or late in the evening? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from. And when you take time out of your day to listen to this old grandma's stories, let me know. Okay, let's create a chain of kindness. Today I wanted to share with you a story that I haven't told many people. It's a difficult story, the kind you keep locked in your chest for many years, afraid to open the door and let it out. But you know, my dears, sometimes telling is a way to free yourself. And who knows, maybe my story will help someone going through something similar. Life isn't always as colourful as my guinea fowl. Sometimes it's a theatre of horrors, as it was for me for so long. I was born in Milfield, a small town in rural Ohio, in 1953. Back then, the town was very different from what it is today. There were few paved streets, many wooden houses, and everyone knew everyone. My family lived in a large house in the upper part of town. It was an old building, dark wood, with a porch that wrapped around the front and tall windows with lace curtains that my mother insisted on keeping impeccably white. My father, Oscar Thompson, owned the only electrical supply store in the region. A tall man with broad shoulders, always wearing a well-pressed shirt and dress pants, even on the hottest days. He had cold green eyes like well water and a thick moustache that he trimmed every week with a small pair of scissors he kept in his pocket. In town, everyone respected him. Mr. Thompson is a serious man, they would say, and he liked that reputation, cultivated that image very carefully. As for my mother, Irene Andrews Thompson, she was an elementary school teacher, thin, always with her hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore round glasses that slid down her narrow nose when she lowered her head to read. She had a soft voice, almost a whisper, and a quiet way of walking, as if she didn't want to be noticed. She taught English and was known for being strict about grammar. Students feared her red pen corrections, but outside the classroom, she was a woman who was barely heard. I was an only child. My parents tried to have other children, but my mother had some problems, as they used to say back then. It wasn't until much later that I understood these were miscarriages. So all attention was focused on me. And that wasn't always a good thing. Believe me, our house was too big for just 3 people. It had 4 bedrooms, a living room, a separate dining room, kitchen, and a spacious basement where my father kept his tools and other belongings. The backyard had some fruit trees, a yellow plum tree that gave enormous sweet fruit, and 2 apple trees. During fruit season, I would climb those trees and stay up there, hidden among the leaves, eating fruit still warm from the sun. Those were rare moments of freedom. At school, I was a quiet girl. I kept to myself, studied hard, got good grades. Not that I was very smart. No, it was more out of fear. My father wouldn't accept low grades, said it was shameful to have a stupid daughter. So I tried hard, memorized everything, even what I didn't understand. I had few friends. Dorothy, the pharmacist's daughter, was the one who was closest to me. We played with dolls during school breaks, but she never came to my house. Nobody did. The routine in our house was as rigid as a clock. We woke up at 6 a.m. every day, even on Sundays. Breakfast at 6:30, lunch at noon sharp, dinner at 7 p.m. My father hated delays. If I happened to be late for a meal, he would leave the plate on the table but wouldn't allow me to eat. Those who don't respect time don't deserve food, he would say, putting everything in the refrigerator. I slept hungry on those nights. On Sundays, we went to church early. My parents insisted on sitting in the first row. My father left large bills in the collection plate so everyone could see his generosity. After Mass, we walked through the town square greeting acquaintances. What a beautiful family, people would comment. My father smiled proud. My mother looked at the ground, holding my hand tightly. I smiled because I knew that's what they expected of me. When we got home, we changed clothes. My father wouldn't allow us to wear our Sunday clothes at home, said it was wasteful. And we began preparations for the special Sunday lunch. This Sunday lunch was sacred. My mother spent the entire morning in the kitchen preparing roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and a special macaroni and cheese with breadcrumbs on top. It was the only meal where my father served wine, a small glass for him and another for my mother. I drank grape juice, red like the wine. It was on one of those Sunday nights when I was about 8 years old that everything started to change. After dinner, my father announced something new. Today we're going to have a family movie night. My mother looked at him with an expression that at the time I didn't understand, but today I know it was fear mixed with something else. Maybe excitement. I can't say for sure. He told me to go take a bath and put on my pajamas while he arranged the living room. When I returned, the lights were off. Only the small lamp in the corner was on, giving the room a weak yellowish glow. The curtains were closed. The television. Our black and white TV was on, but only showing static, no channel tuned in. My father had dragged his armchair to the centre of the room facing the TV. "Come here, daughter," he called, tapping his knee lightly, indicating that I should sit on his lap. That seemed strange to me. My father wasn't affectionate, never held me or kissed me, but I obeyed as I always did. My mother entered the room carrying a large bowl of popcorn. She sat in the armchair next to us, placed the bowl in her lap, and began to eat slowly, one kernel at a time. "Today, Daddy is going to teach you some important things," he said in a different voice. "Lower Horser, my dears, is difficult to tell. At that age, I didn't really understand. I just knew it was bad, that it hurt my soul, and that afterward I felt dirty, as if I had done something wrong. My father said it was our secret, that all families had their secrets, and that if I told anyone, he and my mother would go to jail, and I would go to an orphanage where children were beaten every day. And my mother, she just sat there watching everything, eating her popcorn. Sometimes I would look at her hoping she would do something, say, 'Stop, protect me.' But she just chewed slowly, watching us as if watching any regular TV program. The sound of popcorn between her teeth was the only sound she made during the entire session. These movie nights began to happen every week, always on Sunday night after dinner. It became a routine as predictable as morning church. I tried to get sick on Sundays, pretended to have stomach aches, headaches, but my father said I was lying, that it was just an act. And so the session happened anyway. At school, I became increasingly quiet. The teacher called my mother once, concerned because I had stopped participating in class, stopped playing at recess. "She's just shy," my mother explained with that polite smile she used in public. "At home, she's a chatterbox. Such a big lie." At home, I hardly spoke. I was afraid that any word might irritate my father, provoke another session outside the scheduled day. It went on like this until I was 12 when I had my first period. I remember the terror I felt seeing the blood, thinking I had really hurt myself after a particularly difficult session. I ran to my mother crying. She explained with no emotion in her voice that I was now a young lady. That night, I heard my parents arguing in their bedroom. The following week, the movie nights had changed. Now they happened in the basement, and they were different, worse in a way. But I won't go into those details, my dears. When I turned 13 in 1966, my father insisted on organising a party. It wasn't common in our town to have parties for girls that age. That was something for rich people or city folk, but he insisted. "My daughter will have a proper party," he told the neighbours. Some commented that Mr. Thompson was becoming more generous with age, if they only knew the truth behind that generosity. The party was held in our backyard, decorated with colourful flags and paper lanterns. Mum spent days preparing snacks, cakes, and sweets. My father even hired a young man who played the accordion to entertain the guests. I remember being impressed by how many people showed up. There were schoolmates, neighbours, parishioners from the church, customers from my father's store. Everyone wanted to honour the daughter of the respected Mr. Thompson. I received several presents. One especially marked me, a diary with a lock. It was Dorothy who gave it to me. "For you to write your secrets," she said, not knowing the weight those words carried. That diary would become my only confidant in the years that followed. My father gifted me with a light blue dress, made of fine fabric with delicate embroidery. "A young lady needs to dress like a young lady," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. But his eyes said something else, something only I could understand. That night, after everyone left, he called me to the basement for the first time. He said he had another present for me, something special, just for us. The basement of our house was a place that always frightened me. It was large with a concrete floor and stone walls, always cold and damp. My father had organised a space there with an old mattress covered by a clean sheet, some pillows, and a weak light bulb hanging from the ceiling. In a corner there was an old wooden chair. "Your mother's throne," he said with a laugh that made my blood freeze. And as in the movie nights before, my mother appeared with her bowl of popcorn. She sat in the chair, began to chew slowly, looking at us with that same empty expression. But there was something different that night. My father was more nervous, more excited. He talked more, said things that before he had only whispered. "Now you're a young lady, Linda," he repeated, as if it were a mantra. "And young ladies need to learn new things." What happened that night was worse than anything that had happened before. For the first time, it wasn't just words, strange touches, or humiliating orders. It was something that broke me inside, that left a wound that never completely healed. I cried, begged him to stop, looked at my mother seeking any sign of help, but she just continued to eat her popcorn as if watching any ordinary scene from a TV show. In the days that followed, I could barely walk. I had pains I couldn't explain to anyone. My mother gave me some medicine without saying a word, without asking how I was. That was the most care I received. At school, the teacher noticed I was different. "Linda, you're pale." "Are you sick?" she asked. I just shook my head. What could I say? Who could I tell? Nobody would believe me. My father was Mr. Thompson, the respected businessman. My mother was Mrs. Thompson, the exemplary teacher. Who would listen to a girl accusing her own parents of such horrible things? I started writing in the diary Dorothy gave me. I wrote everything, every detail of the sessions, every word my father said, every empty look from my mother. It was my only form of release. I kept the diary under a loose floorboard in my room, a place I discovered by chance when I was little. There it was safe, or so I thought. The sessions in the basement became regular. They weren't just on Sundays anymore. They happened whenever my father felt like it, 2-3 times a week. Sometimes when he drank more, he would come to my room in the middle of the night. On these occasions, my mother wasn't present with her popcorn, and somehow that made everything even more frightening. To survive, I created a safe place in my mind. During the sessions, I would transport myself far away from there. I imagined myself in Portland, a city I knew only from photos in old magazines at the school library. In my fantasies, I lived alone in a small but clean apartment, worked in a fine clothing store, had friends, went out for ice cream on Sundays. It was a simple life but free from the horrors of the basement. By age 14, I was completely changed. The happy girl I once was had disappeared. In her place was a quiet teenager with always lowered eyes who startled at any touch. My only joy was school. There, for a few hours I could pretend I was normal, that I had a family like the others. It was at this time that Miss Olivia arrived at our school. Coming from Portland to replace a teacher who had retired, she brought a breath of fresh air. She spoke differently, dressed differently, had different ideas. In English class, she encouraged us to write essays about our dreams, our fears, our desires. "Writing liberates," she would say. One afternoon, it was just the two of us in the classroom. I had offered to help her organize the books on the shelf. She watched me as I worked in silence. "Linda, you write very well," she commented suddenly. "Your texts have an unusual depth for someone your age." I thanked her timidly without raising my eyes. "But there's something that worries me," she continued. "There's a sadness in your words, a pain that isn't normal in a 14-year-old girl." I felt my heart race. No one had ever noticed, or at least never said anything. "You know you can trust me, don't you?" she asked, her voice as soft as a caress. "If there's something bothering you, something you want to tell." For a moment I almost told her everything. The words were on the tip of my tongue, but then I remembered my father's threats, my mother's empty look, the constant fear, and I just shook my head, swallowing my tears. "Everything's fine, Miss Olivia," I lied. "I just like writing sad stories." She didn't insist, but made it clear that her door would always be open if I wanted to talk. That night I wrote about her in my diary, about how it would be to have a mother like Emmy Olivia, someone who really cared. The following weeks were the same as the previous ones. School during the day, terror at night. My father seemed increasingly out of control. The store wasn't doing well. There were debts, problems that he brought home and took out on me. My mother continued in her role as a silent spectator, eating her popcorn while my life was destroyed before her eyes. One afternoon, returning from school, I found the house in chaos. My mother was running from one side to the other, packing suitcases. My father was shouting orders, his face red with anger. "What's happening?" I asked, fearful. "We're moving," my father responded dryly. "I closed the store. We're going to Cincinnati. I have a cousin there who got me a job in a factory." I felt a mix of fear and hope. Moving to a different city meant leaving behind the school, Miss Olivia, Dorothy. But it could also mean a new beginning. Maybe in a bigger city with more people, more eyes. The sessions would stop. Maybe my father would be afraid to continue with that in a place where he wasn't known, respected. "When are we going?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "Pack only the essentials. We'll buy the rest there." That night, as I packed my small suitcase, I made a decision. I wouldn't take clothes or shoes or the few toys I still kept. I would take only one thing, my diary. It was the only proof of what I had lived through, the only thing that kept me sane. I hid it at the bottom of the suitcase between two old blouses. The next morning we left before dawn. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. We left behind the large, dark wooden house, the basement of horrors, the town that had been a silent witness to my suffering. On the bus to Cincinnati, I sat by the window, watching Milfield disappear behind us. I didn't know what awaited me in the new city, but I was certain of one thing. Hell was traveling with us. Cincinnati was a very different city from Milfield. Bigger, noisier, full of factories and hurried people. Our new house was in a neighborhood far from downtown, a simple brick building much smaller than the previous one. Only 2 bedrooms, one for my parents, another for me. A small kitchen, a cramped living room, and a dirt backyard. My father started working in a lumber processing factory. He came home tired, smelling of sawdust and sweat. My mother got a job at a local public school, not as a teacher but as a cleaning assistant. Her hands, once delicate from holding only chalk and books, were now always red and cracked from the constant use of cleaning products. I thought this change, this harder life, might change something in our family dynamic. For a few weeks I nursed that hope. My father seemed very busy with work, came home late, often already drunk, and fell into bed with no energy for anything else. The sessions stopped temporarily, and I began to breathe a little more easily. But the truce didn't last long. Soon he discovered that the basement of the neighbouring house, which was unoccupied, had an entrance through the back of our yard. All he had to do was jump over the low brick wall and enter through an old door that didn't close properly. He cleaned a corner there, put some old blankets on the floor, and the ritual began again, now with a terrible difference, since we were in a strange land without the security of the reputation he had in Milfield. He became even more aggressive, more violent. And my mother, she continued with her role as a spectator. She brought her bowl of popcorn, sat in a corner, and watched everything with those empty eyes. Sometimes I noticed something different in her, a silent tear, a tremor in her hands, but never, not once, did she do anything to help me, to prevent what was happening. At the new school, I was just another transfer student from a small town. Nobody knew me. Nobody cared about me. I didn't make friends. I stayed alone during breaks, sitting in a corner of the schoolyard, watching the other girls laugh and talk. How could I approach them? What would I say if they asked about my family, about my life? The secrets I carried isolated me like invisible walls. At 15, I began to have health problems, constant headaches, insomnia, lack of appetite. I lost so much weight that my ribs showed through my pale skin. At school, the guidance counselor, Mrs. Clarice, called me in for a talk. "Linda, we're concerned about you," she said, looking over her thin-rimmed glasses. "Your teachers have noticed that you've been very down. Don't participate in class. Your grades are falling." I kept my eyes down, hands clasped in my lap. What could I say? "Is something happening at home?" she asked directly. I felt my heart racing. This was my chance. I thought someone was asking. Someone seemed to care. But then I remembered my father's threats. What could happen if I spoke? And more than that, I remembered the shame. How could I tell what happened in the basement of the neighboring house? Who would believe me? "No, Mom," I answered softly. "I'm just not sleeping well. I think it's the move, the new city." She didn't seem convinced, but she didn't insist much either. She gave me a note for my parents to sign, requesting a visit from them to the school. I never delivered the note, of course. I tore it into tiny pieces as soon as I left her office. It was during this time that I began to think about running away, or worse, ending it all at once. I spent hours looking out my bedroom window, imagining what it would be like to just walk away aimlessly until I was far away. Or what it would be like to jump from the bridge that crossed the Ohio River at the edge of the city. These dark fantasies were my only company on sleepless nights. My diary continued to be my refuge. I wrote in it almost every day, hidden under the covers by the light of a small flashlight I had received from a teacher at Christmas. On its yellowed pages, I poured out all my pain, all my hatred, all my hopelessness. Sometimes I would reread what I had written in previous years in Milfield and realized how the frightened girl from before had transformed into a broken teenager without dreams, without a future. One night, coming home from work, drunker than usual, my father entered my room. It wasn't session time, and that made me even more terrified. He staggered to my bed, sat on the edge, and began to talk disjointedly about how he had been humiliated by the supervisor at the factory, how nobody respected him in that city, how he missed Milfield, where he was somebody. "There I was, Mr. Thompson," he muttered, his breath heavy with alcohol. "Here, I'm just another worker just like all the others." Suddenly his eyes changed. They became more focused, colder. He grabbed my arm forcefully, squeezing until he left marks. "But at home, I'm still the boss," he said through clenched teeth. "Here, I'm in charge, understand?" I quickly agreed, trying to calm him down, but something in me had changed too. The fear was still there, of course, but there was something else now. A quiet anger, a hatred that grew each day. At that moment, looking at him so closely, drunk and pathetic, I realized he wasn't an invincible monster as I thought when I was a child. He was just a weak, frustrated man who took out his frustrations on a defenseless girl. He left the room as abruptly as he had entered, stumbling over his own feet. I heard when he fell into bed in the room next door, and soon began to snore. My mother arrived shortly after. I heard her light steps in the kitchen, the sound of dishes being washed, and then the silence when she went to sleep. I lay in bed looking at the peeling ceiling, thinking about my life, how I had gotten to this point, how I could get out. That's when I had an idea. It wasn't really a plan. It was more a thought that slowly took shape. What if I wasn't the only victim? What if there were other girls, other women my father had hurt? What if I could find these people, gather our stories? The next day I skipped school. I waited for my parents to leave for work and went to the basement of the neighbouring house. I needed to see that place in daylight without the terror of the sessions. It was a damp room with exposed brick walls and a concrete floor. In one corner, the old blankets where everything happened. In another, some boxes abandoned by the previous residents. I began to search through these boxes, not knowing exactly what I was looking for. I found old magazines, rusty tools, some mouldy clothes. Nothing special. I was about to give up when at the bottom of the last box I found a yellowed envelope. Inside were photographs. Photographs of women and girls, all in embarrassing poses, clearly taken without consent. Some I recognized as residents from Milfield, and in a corner of each photo, the same watermark, Thompson Photography. My stomach turned. So that was it. My father didn't just abuse me, he photographed other women, invaded their privacy. He probably used these photos to blackmail them, to keep them silent. It was as if a veil had been lifted from my eyes. It wasn't just about me, about our family secret. It was something bigger, more terrible. I put the photos back in the envelope and hid it under my blouse. I returned home trembling, my heart pounding. I needed to think, needed to decide what to do with that discovery. It was proof, evidence of what my father really was, but how to use it. Who would believe me? A teenager against an adult man, a respectable worker. That night, I wrote everything in my diary in detail. Each photo I had seen, each name I had recognized. It was as if I was putting together a macabre puzzle of my father's secret life. And that's when I made a decision. I could no longer remain silent. It wasn't just about me anymore. There were other victims, other lives destroyed or threatened by him. The next day, I took my diary and the envelope with the photos and went to the police station. Not the one in our neighborhood where my father might have acquaintances, but one downtown far enough to feel safe. I asked to speak with a female officer, if there was one. To my luck, there was one. Detective Zelma, a middle-aged woman with grey hair pulled back in a severe bun and penetrating eyes. Sitting in the cold room at the police station with my diary in my lap and the yellowed envelope of photographs beside me, I felt a mix of terror and determination. Detective Zelma looked at me with those penetrating eyes, waiting for me to begin speaking. My throat was dry. My hands were trembling so much that I could barely hold the diary. "You can speak, girl," she said in a surprisingly gentle tone for someone with such a severe appearance. "I'm here to listen." I took a deep breath and began to tell. At first, the words came out choppy, interrupted by sobs and long silences. I talked about Milfield, about the movie nights, about my mother with her bowl of popcorn. I told about the move to Cincinnati, about the basement of the neighboring house, about the nights of terror I had lived through in recent years. The detective didn't interrupt, didn't question, didn't show disbelief. She just listened, occasionally noting something on a pad of paper, her eyes never leaving mine. When I finished my account, I handed her my diary open to the most recent pages where I described the discovery of the photographs. And this, I said, pushing the envelope toward her, was what I found yesterday. Detective Zelma opened the envelope carefully, almost as if she feared what she would find inside. She examined the photographs one by one, her face hardening with each image. When she finished, she put them back in the envelope and looked at me with an expression I will never forget, a mixture of compassion, anger, and determination. "Linda," she said, using my name for the first time, "you were very brave to come here. What your father is doing is a crime, a serious one. We will take all necessary measures." Those words should have comforted me, but they only increased my terror. What would happen now? Where would I go? What would my father do when he discovered I had reported him? "I'm afraid," I admitted, my voice almost a whisper. He'll kill me when he finds out. He won't lay a finger on you, she assured. Her voice is firm as steel. I'm going to assign a female officer to stay with you. We'll take you to a temporary shelter where you'll be safe, and today we'll arrest your father. I left the police station accompanied by a young police officer named Nancy. She took me to a simple house in a residential neighborhood. It was a shelter for women victims of violence, she explained. I would stay there until everything was resolved. I couldn't leave or contact anyone from outside for my own safety. The house was run by nuns. Sister Constance, a lady with a serene face and kind eyes, showed me where I would sleep. A small but clean room with a twin bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out to an inner garden. There were 3 other women in the shelter, all older than me, all fleeing from violent husbands or partners. None asked details of my story, and I didn't ask about theirs either. There was a silent agreement of respect for each other's pain. I spent 3 days in that limbo with no news from the outside world, not knowing what was happening with my parents, not knowing what my fate would be. Sister Constance tried to distract me, teaching me to knit, talking about books, bringing me food that she prepared herself, but my mind couldn't rest. On the morning of the 4th day, Detective Zelma came to visit me. Her face was grave, but there was a spark of satisfaction in her eyes. Your father was arrested yesterday, she announced without preamble, sitting next to me on the garden bench. We found more photographs in your house, hidden in a false wall that he built in the bedroom. And worse, we found negatives of films that he made during the abuses. I felt my stomach turn. Films. He had filmed the sessions. The nausea was so strong that I had to bend over, breathing deeply to not vomit. Right there. Calm down. Breathe, Detective Zelma instructed, holding my arm firmly. It's over. He's in jail and will answer for everything he did. And my mother? I asked when I managed to compose myself. The detective's expression changed, became more somber. She was also detained, she said after a pause. Linda, your mother wasn't just a passive spectator. The evidence we found, she was an active accomplice. Some of the photographs were taken by her. It was as if the whole world had collapsed on me. One thing was knowing that my mother watched, that she didn't protect me. Something completely different was discovering that she actively participated, that she helped my father in that horror. No, I murmured, shaking my head in denial. It can't be. She was a victim too. She was afraid of him. I understand that it's difficult to accept, Detective Zelma said, her voice softer now, but the evidence is clear. We found a notebook of hers, a kind of diary where she described. Well, I don't need to go into details. She wasn't being forced, Linda. She chose to participate. I began to cry. A cry different from all I had cried before. It wasn't from fear or physical pain. It was the cry of the last illusion being destroyed, the last hope dissolving. Even in the worst moments, I always believed that my mother somehow was also a victim. Perhaps traumatized, perhaps too terrified to react. Knowing that she was an active part of that horror, it was more than I could bear. Detective Zelma gave me time to process that devastating revelation. When I finally calmed down, she continued, We need to talk about what will happen now. You're 17, almost 18. Legally, you're still a minor, but you're very close to adulthood. We have some options for you. She explained that I could go to a juvenile home until I turned 18, but acknowledged that it wouldn't be ideal, since it was only a few months, until my birthday. The other option would be a foster family who would receive me temporarily. Or if I preferred, I could stay at the nuns' shelter for a while longer while we decided the best path. There's still a fourth possibility, she added hesitant. We have a witness protection program. Since your testimony will be crucial in the case against your parents, we can offer this. It would mean a complete change. New city, new identity, New beginning. That last option lit something inside me. A new beginning. Far from Cincinnati, far from the memories, far from everything that reminded me of the hell I had lived through. I want that, I said without hesitation. I want to go far away, start over in another place where nobody knows me, where nobody knows. Detective Zelma nodded. Understanding. I understand. I'll start the procedures, but first you'll need to testify. Give an official statement that will be used in the case. Are you prepared for that? I wasn't, of course. How could anyone be prepared to publicly relive the worst nightmare of their life? But I knew it was necessary. Not just for my own liberation, but to ensure that my parents could never harm anyone again. Yes, I replied, a new determination growing inside me. I'll tell everything, every detail. They need to pay for what they did. That night, alone in the small room at the shelter, I wrote a final entry in my diary. A new diary that Sister Constance had given me since the old one was with the police as evidence. I wrote about the pain of the final betrayal, about the discovery that my mother wasn't a victim, but a voluntary participant in the abuse. I wrote about the fear of what would come next, but also about a faint hope that was beginning to be born. The hope of a different future, of a life far from that horror. When I finished writing, I did something I had never done before. I tore out the page, crumpled it, and threw it out the window, watching the wind carry it away. It was a symbolic gesture, my first attempt to leave the past behind. The past that now for the first time was really beginning to stay in the past. 2 weeks passed since I was taken to the nuns' shelter. 2 weeks of anxious waiting, of sleepless nights, of days filled with small tasks that Sister Constance gave me to keep my mind occupied. I knitted 2 scarves, learned to make homemade bread, helped organize the small library at the shelter. Anything to not think too much about what was to come. Detective Zelma came to visit me regularly, updating me on the progress of the case. My parents remained in custody. My father denied everything, claiming that I had made up that story to get revenge on him for being a strict father. My mother surprisingly confessed. She told everything to the investigators, confirming every detail of my account and revealing other horrors that I didn't even know about. She is cooperating with the justice system, explained the detective. This doesn't diminish the gravity of what she did, but it facilitates the process. I couldn't understand why was my mother confessing now after so many years of complicit silence. Was it remorse or just a strategy to get some judicial benefit? She asked about you, Detective Zelma mentioned, carefully observing my reaction. Wants to know if you're okay. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. Okay? How could I be okay? How dare she worry about me now after everything? Tell her I'm dead, I replied, my voice heavy with an anger I didn't even know I carried. To her, to him, I'm dead, and they are to me. The detective just nodded, respecting my feelings. She didn't bring up the subject again. At the end of that week, I received an unexpected visit. A tall man with glasses wearing a simple suit. He introduced himself as District Attorney Eugene, the prosecutor in charge of the case. Linda, he said, sitting across from me in the visiting room of the shelter. We need to talk about your testimony. It will be fundamental to the case. He explained in detail how the procedure would be. I wouldn't have to confront my parents directly. I would speak only to the judge in a separate room. My testimony would be recorded and used in the trial. It would need to be detailed, specific, but he assured me that he would do everything to make the process as least traumatic as possible. When? I asked, feeling my stomach sink. Tomorrow, he replied, adjusting his glasses. The sooner we finish this stage, the quicker we can proceed with the protection program. That night was the worst since I had arrived at the shelter. I couldn't sleep for even a minute. I relived every moment of horror, every session, every empty look from my mother eating popcorn while my life was destroyed. When the sun rose, I was already ready, dressed in the simple but clean clothes that the nuns had given me. Sister Constance accompanied me to the courthouse. It was an intimidating building with imposing columns and a staircase that seemed infinite. Inside, cold and dark corridors led to rooms with heavy wooden doors. I was led to a small room where Detective Zelma and District Attorney Eugene were already waiting for me, along with an older man who was introduced as Judge Herbert. The testimony lasted for hours. I spoke until there were no more tears to cry. I told everything from the first movie nights in Milfield to the abuses in the basement of the neighboring house in Cincinnati. I spoke about my mother's role, about the diary where I recorded everything, about the photographs I found. The judge asked occasional questions, always respectful but insisting on details I would prefer to forget. When I finally finished, I was exhausted, physically and emotionally drained. But there was also a strange feeling of relief, as if an enormous weight had been lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in years, someone with the power to do something had heard me, had believed me. "You were very brave," said Judge Herbert with a respectful gravity in his voice. "Your testimony is crucial for justice to be done." I returned to the shelter accompanied by Sister Constance, who held my hand during the entire journey without saying anything. Sometimes silence is the best comfort. In the days that followed, I was in a state of numbness, as if I had exhausted all possible emotions. I slept a lot, ate little, spoke even less. The other women at the shelter, perceiving my state, were kind in their own way. One would bring me a cup of tea. Another would leave flowers picked from the garden beside my bed. Small gestures of solidarity that at that moment meant the world to me. A week after my testimony, Detective Zelma returned to the shelter. Her face was different. There was a lightness I hadn't seen before. "The judge ordered the preventive detention of your parents," she announced. "The case will go to trial, but that could take months. Meanwhile, both will remain in custody." It was a victory, albeit a small one. It meant that at least for now they couldn't reach me, couldn't harm anyone else. "And what about the protection program?" I asked, anxious to know when I could really begin my new life. "That's what I came to talk about," she said, sitting beside me. "We secured a place for you in Portland, Oregon. It's a big city where it will be easier to rebuild your life anonymously. You'll have a new identity, a place to live, and help to finish your studies and find work. Portland, the city of my dreams, the place where I mentally transported myself during the worst moments. It was almost too unreal to believe." "When?" I asked, barely containing the hope in my voice. "In 3 days," she replied. "There are some documents to prepare, some guidelines I need to give you, and you'll need to choose your new name." My new name. I hadn't thought about that. Who did I want to be in this new life? Who could I be free from the horrors of the past? "Can I keep Linda?" I asked, hesitant. It was the only piece of me that wasn't stained by my parents' dirty hands. It was the name my maternal grandmother had chosen long before all the horror began. Detective Zelma considered for a moment. "The last name needs to change, obviously, but I think we can keep Linda as your first name. It's not so uncommon as to facilitate your identification." In the 3 days that followed, I prepared for my new life. I received new documents, birth certificate, ID card, all with my new name, Linda Andrews. The last name was common enough not to draw attention, but different enough from the original to ensure my anonymity. I also received detailed instructions about how my arrival in Portland would be. A social worker would be waiting for me at the bus station, Ms. Teresa, a lady who had been working with the protection program for years. She would take me to a small apartment in the Hawthorne neighborhood where I would initially stay. I would receive a small financial aid for 6 months, time enough to establish myself, find work, start over. On the eve of my departure, Sister Constance called me to her office. It was a simple cubicle with a wooden desk, some chairs, and shelves full of religious books. "I have something for you," she said, extending a small package. "A memento from us." Inside the simple gift paper there was a wooden rosary with dark polished beads and a small prayer book. "I know your faith has been shaken, and with good reason," she continued, her voice soft. "But when you're ready, perhaps this can bring some comfort." I hugged her, tears silently flowing. They weren't tears of sadness, but of gratitude. Amid so much horror, I had found people like Sister Constance, Detective Zelma, people who believed in me, who helped me survive. On the morning of my departure, I said goodbye to the other women at the shelter. Some cried, others just squeezed my hands in silence. All understood in their own way what it meant to start over. Detective Zelma came to pick me up personally. On the way to the bus station, we passed in front of the police station. "Do you want to come in, see your diary one last time before leaving?" she asked. I thought for a moment and then shook my head. No, that diary belongs to the old Linda, the one who suffered, the one who survived. I'm taking with me only the Linda who will live, not just survive. She smiled a smile of understanding and respect. "You have a strength inside you that few have. You know, you'll do well in Portland." I'm sure the bus to Portland left punctually at 10 a.m. Sitting by the window, I saw Cincinnati disappear behind. The buildings, the streets, the memories. I didn't look back even once. My eyes were fixed on the road ahead, on the future that for the first time seemed possible. In my lap, a new diary, a farewell gift from Detective Zelma. On the first page, I wrote only, "Today my life begins, the real one." I arrived in Portland on a rainy autumn day with just a small suitcase containing some clothes and my new diary. The city welcomed me with its grey sky and cold air. So different from the heat of Milfield or the dust of Cincinnati. Miss Teresa was waiting for me at the bus station, exactly as arranged. A lady with grey hair pulled back in a bun, wearing a navy blue coat and carrying a flowery umbrella. "Welcome to your new life, my child," she said as she hugged me, as if she had known me for years. Those first months in Portland were difficult, I won't lie. I lived in a small apartment in Hawthorne, a neighborhood in the southeast part of the city. It was a simple place, 1 bedroom, a tiny living room, a kitchen, and a bathroom. But it was mine. For the first time in my life, I had a space that was just mine, where I could lock the door and feel safe. I started studying at night to finish high school while working during the day at a small fabric store downtown. The salary was little, but added to the help I received from the protection program, it was enough to support myself. Gradually, I adapted to the rhythm of the big city, learning to use the buses, discovering the parks, getting used to the cold that seemed more intense than any I had ever felt. It was at the fabric store that I met Robert. He was a representative of a textile factory in Seattle. Came to Portland every 2 months to show the new products. A tall man with broad shoulders, but with a quiet and respectful manner that made me comfortable. He talked about literature, about politics. They were difficult times in the country with the Vietnam War and all the social changes, about the dreams he had of one day opening his own store. At first, I avoided him. I avoided any man, actually. The fear was too great, the scars still too recent. But Robert was patient. He didn't pressure me, didn't insist. He was just there with his calm smile and his interesting stories, always respecting my silences, my retreats. It took almost a year until I agreed to go out with him for coffee. Another 6 months until our first kiss on a Sunday afternoon at Washington Park, the city's largest park. With him, I learned that not all men were like my father, that there could be affection without violence, intimacy without abuse, love without fear. We married in 1975 in a simple ceremony at Portland St. Mary's Cathedral. I was 22 years old and for the first time felt that life could be good. We bought a small house in the same Hawthorne neighborhood near where I already lived. Robert managed to open his fabric store and I started working with him. We were happy in our quiet way. The only dream we never realized was having children. The doctors were never able to explain exactly why, but suspected that the physical traumas I suffered in my adolescence had left lasting effects. I cried over this loss, of course, but Robert always said, "We are a complete family, you and I. The rest is a gift if it comes." And so we lived year after year, building our small daily happiness. The store prospered. We moved to a bigger house. We took some trips. I saw the ocean for the first time at age 30 in Cannon Beach. Life followed its course, tranquil like a river that finally found its way after passing over many stones. In 2010, Robert fell ill. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that when they discover it, it's already too advanced. In 6 months, he was gone. It was a different pain from all I had ever felt. Not the acute terror of childhood abuse, but a deep sadness, an immense emptiness from losing my companion of almost 35 years. I was lost for a time. I sold the store, had no energy to continue alone. I spent days at home looking at the walls at the photos that showed our life together. It was my heart daughter Cecilia, daughter of my best friend Dorothy, whom I reconnected with by chance years after arriving in Portland, who pulled me out of that torpor. "Aunt Linda," she said one day, "you need to do something with your hands. The heart calms when the hands work." It was she who enrolled me in a ceramics class at the neighborhood community center. I went reluctantly, more to please her than out of real interest. But right in the first class, when I felt the cold, malleable clay between my fingers, something awakened in me. A creativity I didn't know existed, a form of expression I had never experienced. I started making simple pieces, little pots, small vases. Then one day, inspired by a magazine about folk art, I tried to make a miniature guinea fowl. It wasn't perfect, of course, but there was something about it in the white spots on the dark body, in the peculiar shape of the head that enchanted me. I made another and another, each one a little different, each with its own personality. People began to notice, to ask if they were for sale. Almost without realizing it, I started a small business that grew more than I could have imagined. Today, at 72 years old, my ceramic guinea fowl are known throughout Portland. I sell them at craft fairs. I have a small website which my grandniece helps me manage, and I even receive orders from other cities. It's work that brings me joy, that occupies my hands and calms my heart, as Cecilia said would happen. I live in the same apartment in Hawthorne where I created so many memories with Robert. It's my corner of peace in this world. I have my ceramics workshop in the back room, my collection of favourite guinea fowl on the living room shelf, my books, my good memories. Dorothy visits me every week. We have tea together, talk about old times and new ones. I never returned to Milfield or Cincinnati. Never had news of my parents again. I learned from Detective Zelma that both were sentenced to many years in prison. If they're still alive, I don't know, nor do I want to know. That part of my story is closed, kept in a place in my memory that I visit less and less. Portland welcomed me, gave me a new life, allowed me to be who I really am. Not the victim, not the survivor, but simply Linda, the artisan of guinea fowl, Robert's widow, Dorothy's friend, the heart-great aunt of Tina and her siblings. A woman who learned that life, even after the worst of terrors, can bloom again. My dear friends, who have accompanied me on this journey of memories, some sweet, others bitter, I want to leave you with some words that I've gathered over my 72 years of life. For those going through difficult situations like those I experienced, I want to say, you are not alone. Silence is the greatest ally of abuse. Speaking up, even when it's difficult, even when the words catch in your throat, is the first step toward liberation. Nowadays, there are so many ways to seek help that didn't exist in my time. Hotlines for reporting, specialized police units, professionals prepared to support you. I've learned that age doesn't define our strength, but rather our capacity to begin again each day. When I arrived in Portland at 18 years old with just a small suitcase, I thought I would never truly be happy, that the scars were too deep. But I was wrong. My wrinkles are maps of survival. Each one tells a story of pain overcome. Life taught me that even in the deepest darkness, our inner light never goes out. In the darkest days in the basement of that house in Cincinnati, when I thought I couldn't bear another day, there was a small flame of hope that refused to be extinguished. It was that flame that led me to keep that diary, to go to the police station, to have the courage to change everything. I never allowed my dignity to be stolen, even when they tried to take everything from me. And I discovered that we are stronger than we imagine, especially when we think we can't take any more. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it teaches us to live with them and still smile. My story isn't about what was done to me, but about how I chose to respond. And I chose to live, not just survive. I learned that true strength isn't in never falling, but in rising every time. The invisible scars we carry show that we can flourish, even after the storm. And now, my dear friends watching me, I want to ask something from the heart. If this video touched you in some way, if my story made any difference in your life, please hit that subscribe button right now. It's not just for me. It's because each subscription helps this message reach further. And who knows, maybe we can reach that girl, that boy, that woman who needs to hear that they're not alone, that there is hope and more. Share this video now with someone you think needs to hear this message. Your action could save a life, could give courage to someone who is suffering in silence. In the comments, leave the word resurrection so I know who watched until the end and understood the essence of my story. Always remember, no matter how dark the night, the sun always rises again. And you deserve to be here to see that dawn. Thank you for listening to me from the bottom of my heart.